Mitch. I love the framing of that, a little time capsule. For me, that song brings me back to, I don't see Matt Lewis here. Okay, Matt Lewis is out here, I'm sorry. My first thought is a summer camp, a high school summer camp for me. It was my first high school summer camp. And the camp band was a little band known as the Matt Lewis Experience. And Matt was the camp band, he led worship, and they played that song, and I can see myself in Jensen Chapel right now, bawling my eyes out for some reason, I don't know, at some point, but it's a good memory for me. But I've realized over the past few years that I've been blessed to be a part of a church like ours, an intergenerational church like ours, a church that cares about our young people and invests in our young people, who take people to camp, who send our pastors up to camp to spend nights in cabins with them, who invest their time and their energy in young people. Even the fact that if you just look, if you're here with us this morning, you just look around the room, you'll see people who are over 80 years old, and you'll see people who are barely teenagers, if that yet. I think I actually saw an infant in here. I wasn't going to count the infant as part of the list. That's probably not fair, but that we have all these ages together, worshiping together, being invested, learning about what God is doing together. And that doesn't even factor in the people who are watching online with their whole families in the room right now. And not every church is like this, right? What I've learned over the past few years is actually the vast majority of churches are not like this. And this week is an opportunity for us as a church to continue to think about, what does it look like for us to raise up the next generation? What does it look like for us as a church to raise up Gen Z, the people who are between the ages right now of 10 and 25? What does it look like for us? Because if you don't know this, Gen Z is the largest generation in America today. Okay, there are 86 million young people in Gen Z in America today, and 42% of them right now say they have no religious affiliation whatsoever. 42%. So that comes out to just under 50 million young, or just shy of 40 million young people between the ages of 10 and 25 in America today who say they have no religious affiliation. None at all. What we see is that, just for the record, that's about the same percentage as millennials. It's twice that of boomers and builders before them. And only 26.4% of Gen Z identify themselves as Protestant of some sort, another 17% Catholic. And I'm not the best at math, but I'm gonna say that comes out to 43%, yeah? Identify as Christian in some meaningful way. And here's the terrifying thing, is that we know that around 70% of young people walk away from their faith when they get to college. When they get to college, they no longer identify as Christian, they walk away from their faith. And here's why that's terrifying, is that only about half of Gen Z has graduated from high school yet. Which means that these numbers are going to get worse. And to which you might say, quick, okay? Don't let our kids go to college. Let's keep them home. Let's keep them safe. Let's protect them from the philosophy professors and their ivory towers, right? And I can say that because my dad's a philosophy professor. But I can say right now, that won't work. What we know is that about 80% of young people who walked away from their faith in college did so while they were still in high school. They just didn't tell anyone about it. They didn't feel comfortable saying how they felt at home any longer. And so for us, the solution can't be to keep them here and keep them safe. And the sad thing is that those numbers are true for people who go to Christian colleges or secular colleges. They're for people who go to school close to home or far away. And so our solution can't be to just keep them home and keep them safe. Because we know that the statistics say 70% of them will walk away from their faith in college. And that means that by 2030, we can project that nearly 60% of Gen Z will have no faith whatsoever. Almost 75% of Gen Z will have no faith in Jesus. 75%. That's 60 million young people who will have no faith in Jesus in 9 years. Those are our kids. Those are our grandkids. Those are our friends. But what's important to notice is that statistics are descriptive, right? They tell us the current state of things. They tell us the way things are right now, and they can give us a pretty good assessment of the way things will be if nothing changes. But we have an invitation, we have an opportunity to change things, right? What statistics tell us is if I had a quarter on me, if anyone, is there still a change shortage? Do people have change anymore? I don't know. But if I flipped a quarter enough times, right, what would happen? I'd get 50% heads and 50% tails over time. And that's just what the statistics say. That's what will happen. I mean, I guess there's like a small percentage for like it lands on its side or something, but that's more or less the way it breaks down. But if you add a weight to the quarter, it changes the whole thing. And what we have is an opportunity here as a church to add a weight, to place our hands on the scales and to tip the scales in the favor of this generation. And we get an invitation to do that out of the Psalms. If you'd open up with me to Psalm 78. In Psalm 78, we're just going to read the first 8 or so verses, or first 7 verses, because it's a long psalm. It's a psalm that's filled with the history of what God has done for his people, a history of what God was doing for his people at the time. And we're going to read these first 7 verses, and this is what it says. It says, "My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born. And they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but keep his commands." And Psalm 78 gives us a challenge to not just accept the statistics as they are, to not just accept the way things are right now, but to do the work that is necessary to raise up the next generation to put their trust in God, to know the things that God has done for them, and to keep his commands. That was the call on the psalmist. That was the call of God on his generation. And this morning, that's going to be our big idea for tonight, that God's call for us is to help the next generation put their trust in him. Not that they would just know a lot about God. Not that they would just know kind of how to talk the Jesus jargon, right? Not that they would just know some information about God, but that they would put their trust in him. That like Peter in Matthew 14, they would see Jesus out in front of them and they would step out of the boat in faith towards him. That they would walk out onto the waters in pursuit of Jesus and the life that he has for us. And I've spent my whole life here at Beachpoint, right? Many of you know that. And I've seen firsthand how we as a church have lived out that call for years. I'm a product of it. As much as some of us might wish that I was not a product of it, I'm a product of it. I went to Sunday school here. Rob Madsen and Linda Engel were my Sunday school teachers, right? Ron Roundtree was my woodshop teacher here for my woodshop Sunday school class. And then he married my grandma. And I don't know what to do with that, okay? That was a weird thing, but it happened. Amy and Gabe Hall were my children's pastors, and they not only discipled me and formed my discipleship as a child, but they invested in me as a high school student to think about how to lead well and how to lead people towards Jesus. Josh Lazier became my leader in middle school, and he stuck it out. He discipled me and my friends all the way through high school. Ken Primo and Bill continued to work with me to explore my calling and to see what God had called me into. And then through it all, my parents and my grandparents, they did their best to model the life of Jesus to me, to model it with love and graciousness and advice and calling, to help me see what this life looked like. And when I became a pastor, I got to see it in a whole different light. You know, I get invited to the Sojourner Sunday school class on Sunday mornings, and I get to talk to people who just cared about seeing young people encounter Jesus, talking with people who care about seeing 13, 14, 15-year-old high school students know Jesus, people who are 70, maybe even 80 years older than these kids. Or so many of you who volunteer with VBS projects or camp, getting everything ready. You can just picture the youth building filled to the brim with retired folks or repurposed folks, as Mary would want me to say, who are there for weeks getting everything ready, making sure everything is ready for the kids. I know other pastors who would do almost anything to have rooms filled with Mr. Hardys, or rooms filled with Phyllis Archers, or rooms filled with Connie Lowe's, people who care about seeing the next generation know God and what he's done for them, who see that how important it is for them to invite people, to invite this next generation to put their trust in God. And it's not just our seniors, right? It's not just our seniors. We have countless people in this church who volunteer their time week in and week out to hang out with students, to disciple students, kids, middle school, high school students. And that is not easy work. It's exhausting in a lot of ways, and they give their time to do it. They give vacation time to go to camps and to spend time with students. They give all sorts of money because it's costly to invest in young people's lives. People who just want to see the church, this faith, outlive their generation. Outlive their generation and into the next. But living out this call is costly. It has always been costly for us to live out this call. And in a normal environment, it costs people their preferences and how church should operate. It costs people their finances as they give in support of things that we're doing for students, for young people. It costs people their time as they volunteer to disciple young people. But the past year, I think we can all say, was not a normal environment by any stretch of the imagination. And the past year has made it all that more costly to raise up Gen Z as followers of Jesus. Because basically the way I would describe it is that Gen Z is kind of like, you can just imagine like this pile of like nuclear material, okay? And someone just like tossed it into the middle of our church, right? And we have a choice then to decide what are we going to do about it, because this is the truth, is that Gen Z is inextricably wrapped up in all sorts of things that some of us would probably rather not talk about. Gen Z is inextricably wrapped up in questions and issues of gender and identity, with worries about racial justice, with worries about misconduct and history and hurt and misbehavior. It's basically any issue that you think is a hot button issue, Gen Z's invested in that issue. And so we have a choice before us. We have a choice, which is to say, on the one hand, we can have the easy response, which is to say, look, dealing with those things, dealing with Gen Z, that will be costly. It will be too costly to me. It will be too costly to my family. It will be too costly to the people I'm close to. And so our best option is to just push it out to the side. To just push that material off to the wayside and get it out of the way. And if we do that, what will end up happening is that we'll continue plugging along. We'll have sporadic pockets of young people. We'll have pockets of Gen Z. We'll have pockets of people, young people here at Beachpoint. But we won't be a church that inspires a generation to put their trust in God. We won't be a church that inspires a generation to see what God has for them and the life that he has for them. And the other option is we can decide we can do the difficult work, which is to basically build like a tiny little power plant around Gen Z, to harness the energy and the power of this generation towards the call of Jesus on their lives. And no matter what people tell you, no matter what you hear, I can tell you guys from experience that Gen Z is an incredible generation. Our students here at Beachpoint, our students here in the area are incredible students. They're incredible young people who God is calling in incredible ways. They just, we know, are interested in issues that are much bigger than just themselves. They care deeply for others. They care deeply about the way things are going. And they get off course sometimes. Right? No one's up here saying, hey, Gen Z has nailed it, and everyone else, we need to get with the program. But if we can channel them, if we can invest in them, if we can disciple them, what I know is that God will do something incredible with them. They have this incredible energy and power, and it's up to us to decide if we want to be a part of that or not. But what I know is that if we do the difficult work and we can help this generation put their trust in God, something incredible would happen. But it will be hard work. It will be costly work. But it's the work that I believe that God has called us to do as a church. To not just accept that nearly 70% of young people, or over 70% of young people, will inevitably not have a faith in Jesus, not knowing God or what he's done for them, but to do everything in our power to tip the scales in their favor. Everything we can to tip the scales in their favor so that they can experience God and the love that he has for them and the life that he has for them. But in order for us to do that, we're first going to have to understand where the scales are at. We're going to have to understand Gen Z. We're going to have to understand the world as they see it. Psalm 78 was written just by Asaph, just after a period of civil war in Israel. And the way it goes, as we see, is that we know the story that God anoints David to be the next king of Israel while Saul is still alive. And Saul then dies, and the 12 tribes of Israel fracture because 11 of the tribes, they don't want David to be king. They want Saul's son, Ishbosheth, to be king. And so they 11 of the tribes raise up an army to take the throne from David. And David raises up his own army, and they go off to fight in battle. And in 1 Chronicles 12, we see this really interesting chapter, interesting in the sense that there's not all that much in it in one sense. But in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, we see this list of all the people who come to join David's army in this conflict. All the people who come to join David's side, who see that God has anointed David as king, and they choose to fight on God's side. And in 12:32, it's just one verse. It says this. It says, from Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs with all their relatives under their command. And here's the thing. That's a verse in a long string of verses that it's easy to miss out on. It's easy to kind of write it off as just kind of a list of things going on. But here's what I want us to see is what was it that led them to act on the right side of this conflict, on God's side of this conflict, was that they understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. And if we're going to be a church that raises up Gen Z to put their trust in God, then we have to be a church that understands the times. We have to be a church that understands Gen Z and understands the times that we are in now. Raising up future generations requires that of us. It requires us to understand the times we're in. And the challenge is that at some level, we all think we understand the times. We all think we're the person who's got it figured out. That's the easy temptation to have, right? But the reality is that each of our understandings is shaped by our experiences and by our culture and by what we grew up and what shaped us. And for each generation has its own unique culture, its own unique experiences, its own unique way of seeing the world through those lenses. And I know this because I've been blessed to be a part of a family with 5 generations still alive in my family, all of whom have called Beachpoint home. And there's a lot of conflict in that. There's a lot that doesn't seem to line up. You can just think about it this way. We've got 5 major generations and a 6th that's kind of now rising up. But we've got the builders, right? And we've got some builders here this morning, the people who are over the age of 80, people like my grand-gran, who's my great-grandma. We've got a photo of her. This is my grand-gran. I think this was her high school graduation. Is that what we think? Yeah, we went through a treasure trove of family documents recently. So this is my grand-gran. She's probably watching on her iPad right now at her home. Hi, grand-gran. Yeah. She was born in 1928. Okay, she was born in 1928, which is the cutoff year for her generation. And you can do the math on how old that makes her. She probably doesn't want me to say that out loud. But her formative years were spent as a child during the Great Depression, as a high school student during the Second World War, as a young married couple in the 50s. And those are her formative years that informed her experiences, that informed the way that she sees the world. And after that, after the builders, we have the boomers, the people in their late 50s up to really their 80s, right? People like my grandma Debbie, who many of you know. This is I don't know what this photo's from. What's this photo? High school graduation. Look at that, high school, okay? She practiced Cold War era duck and cover drills, right? Not for earthquakes, but for a nuclear attack. She was a teenager during Dr. King's March on Washington and for JFK's assassination. And she reached adulthood at the height of the Vietnam War with her husband being deployed and her 8-month-old daughter at the time moving across the country from Nebraska to Fountain Valley to come live here when they started attending this church. Those are her formative experiences in many ways. Her 8-month-old was, of course, my mom, who represents Gen X. This is my mom. She's a child of the 80s, to no surprise of anyone based on the hair. Gen X are the people right in their early 40s to late 50s, kind of mid to late 50s right now. My mom, she was a teenager when the Berlin Wall fell. She was a young teacher when the Columbine shooting took place. She was a young mom trying to watch TV when 9/11, when the Twin Towers collapsed, and she was in our living room doing her best to distract her 8-year-old son from what was happening. Those were formative experiences for her in the way that she sees the world. Then there's millennials like me, between the ages of 25 and 40. Yeah, thanks, yeah. This is high school volleyball. I didn't take senior photos, I don't know why, so this is the only photo we get. Between the ages of 25 and 40 today, right? I was a child during the beginnings of the shock and awe campaign in Iraq. I was a student, a teenager when my friends' parents began to lose their jobs and maybe even their houses in 2008. I was a college student who started practicing the run, hide, fight active shooter drills in college following the shootings at Virginia Tech and Aurora, Colorado. And those were formative experiences for me. Those were experiences that have shaped the way that I see the world. And now we have Gen Z, people who are between the ages of 9 and 24, people like my cousins here. This is Taylor and Nathan. And they're still in their formative years, right? Gen Z is still having these formative experiences for their lives. But so far, they've lived their whole lives in a post 9/11 world. They've lived their whole lives in a world that feels something like this. They've experienced all sorts of things already as middle school and high school students. They've lived through a global pandemic in their adolescence. They're coming really into the fullness of their adolescence at a time where we're seeing a sort of social upheaval that is unique for a long time around issues of race and equality and justice. And those are formative experiences for them. And for Gen Z, they're inextricably wrapped up in all of those things. We can't just peel them apart from those experiences, those things that are a part of their formative years now. And now we also have a new generation. We have Gen Alpha, as they're calling them, who are basically the babies. These are my kids. This is Jude and Luca. The babies here who are just beginning to have formative experiences in their lives, who are just starting to see the world for the first time. But what I want us to do is to just think for a second about how wildly different all of our experiences have been. How wildly different all of our lives have been in the ways in which those experiences impact the way we see the times today. When my grandparent was born in 1928, she was closer in time to Lee's surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse in 1865 to end the Civil War than we are right now to the end of the Second World War. When some of our more advanced members here, advanced in quotation marks members here at Beachpoint were born, a lower percentage of them had electricity in their homes than Americans who have smartphones today. We live in a rapidly changing world that is filled with radically different experiences. And it shouldn't be surprising then that there's a divide between how we see the world and how we understand the times that we're in right now. Because we've had these different experiences. And in most contexts, that's totally okay. In most contexts, that's okay. We don't have to do that much interacting between generations, right? It's just like family Thanksgiving dinner where you just hope no one talks about anything that's going to cause a problem. That's most of what we have to do. Right? We can watch our favorite news shows and we can shake our fists at young people and how terrible they are. Or we can write everyone off over the age of 30 with okay boomer, right? Because young people think everyone over 30 is a boomer. And that's fine in most contexts, but it's not fine in church. It's not fine if we're going to be an intergenerational church that's going to raise up the next generation to put their trust in God, to live the life that God has called them to. And so if we want to understand these times, then we're going to have to understand Gen Z in the way that they see these times, the way that they've experienced these times. And look, that's not to embrace a sort of relativism, right? That I think is dangerous, a sort of relativism that says, look, that may be true for you, but that's not true for me, okay? I think that's false. There is some true reality of what these times are like. But the truth is that none of us is actually that good at seeing it that clearly. We're not that good at seeing it that clearly. We're all none of us have just got our finger on the pulse and perfectly nail it. We're all looking at it through this lens of our own experience. And so if we're going to see the world as clearly as we can, if we're going to understand the times, I think we should think of it more like an eye doctor appointment a little bit, okay? Right, you go in and they put that contraption over your face, right? And then you put on different lenses and it's better or worse, better or worse, better or worse. Slowly trying to figure out, are we getting a better picture or a worse picture of what's happening? And if we're going to be people who understand the times and who understand this generation, then we're going to have to do a good job of being able to add their lens in along the way, of seeing the world as they see it, of seeing the world as they've experienced it. And at some point, we're going to have an opportunity to do that. We're going to be hosting a night here at Beachpoint, which will be an opportunity to listen to Gen Z, to listen to some of our students here at Beachpoint, to submit some questions and have them talk a little bit about their experience in life, just so that, it's one thing for me to tell you something. It's another thing to be able to hear it straight from them. And I'm really excited about that, and you'll hear some more info about that soon enough. But the truth is that we can't just understand the times and then not do anything about it, right? We can't just understand the times. We can't just get the clearest sense of what's going on and then not do anything about it, which is why raising up future generations in faith requires each of us to reimagine our role. This is an all hands on deck moment for us. Right? Whether you're a builder or a boomer or Gen X or a millennial or even Gen Z, there is work to be done in raising up this generation to put their trust in God. But the problem is that we've structured so many of our intergenerational connections around information. Right? The expectation, the image that we have in our heads, right, is that we'll get to sit in the rocking chair with the blanket draped over our legs, and the next generation will listen to us impart wisdom and knowledge on them. We'll impart information to them. You pass on information like family recipes or stories about how to do things around the house or stories about history and the way things were. But the problem is that Gen Z doesn't actually need any information. They have more information than they could possibly know what to do with. Watch, here. This is an example. Carly, do you have your phone on you? Wow, no? Carter, do you have your phone on you? Okay, why did you bring your phone to church, Carter? Pull out your phone for me really quick. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to find out what temperature I'm supposed to cook chicken to internally, okay? Can you do that? And then Brian, did you bring your phone? Do you have a phone on you? Can you find out what kind of car does your mom drive? No, just tell me that. You don't need to Google that. You don't know? It's a what? It's a red one. All right, Brian needs more information. Becky, more information with Brian. Can you find a video of how to change the oil in your mom's car? Did you find it, Carter? What is it? 165 degrees, okay? Here's the best part. I asked Amy that earlier, and she said 160. So she's been slowly poisoning her children this whole time, okay? This is why it's important to Google things. Sorry, Amy. Brian, did you find a video? You don't have to show me because I can't put that on the screen. You just have to tell me if you did or not. Okay, he did. See, here's my point, is that this generation has access to more information than they could possibly know what to do with, right? They don't know what to do with all this information. And if we continue to structure our relationships on information that we impart on them, they don't need it. What they need to know is what to do with that information. And the way that we help them see that is by modeling a life that is filled by Jesus. Modeling a life that shows them what to do with the information they can get. Of having relationships that model this life to them. And that's more difficult. That's more costly. Imparting information is cheap. It's easy, right? It's easy to say, this is what you should do. This is how you should do it. This is what you should accomplish. But they have all that. They have all that information. And I can hear the complaints now, right? Someone's saying, okay, well, they know they have the information, but just because Brian can find a video of how to change the oil doesn't mean he can actually do it. And that's true. That's our job then, to show them how to do it. To show them what it looks like to live the life that Jesus has called them to. To model for them what this life will look like. And that's harder. That costs a lot more. That costs energy and effort. It costs vulnerability. It costs us being willing to sacrifice our time and sacrifice our finances and sacrifice all sorts of things in a new way. To invite them to be a part of our life in a deeper and richer way, to see the life that Jesus has for them. And for you parents, I get it. That's a much harder challenge. That's a much more difficult challenge. That means your life has to model for them what a relationship with Jesus looks like. And as hard as we might try, it's much easier to say, do as I say, not as I do. But if we can model this life to them, then they have an opportunity to see Jesus and the life that he has for them in a new light. And for you parents, if you're struggling with that, if that challenge feels difficult, we just want to say you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. As a church, we want to be a part of this with you. We want to come alongside you. We want to partner in this with you. So right now, if you're struggling, if you're feeling like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what this looks like, I would just invite you, go ahead and stop by the Connect table on the way out. Gabe's gonna be out there. Come grab me at the end of the service. Grab Brandon, grab Amy, grab someone on staff and just say, hey, I don't know what to do. We would love to walk alongside you in this. For you grandparents and aunts and uncles and family, you have the same task, the same charge. It's gonna look different for you. But it's going to require new sacrifices and new work and new efforts. And for the rest of us, we know that it takes a village, right? This isn't something that we can do on our own. And telling parents that they have to do this on their own or telling the church that the church should handle it on its own is a recipe for disaster. We all have a role to play. And the data shows us that the young people who are most likely to keep their trust in God are the young people who have at least 5 meaningful relationships with adults who are discipling them. 5 meaningful relationships with adults who model the life of Jesus to them, who allow them to see what that looks like. But that's 5 to 1. That's 5 people for every young person. And that means that each of us has work to do. It means that some of us need to be volunteer leaders in our kids, our middle school, our high school ministries to disciple these young people. It means that some of us need to make the effort to make connections with the young families in our church, to have them over to our houses for dinner, to invest in them, to check in on them, to care for them, and to help their kids see what the life of Jesus looks like beyond high school, beyond their parents' age, into adulthood and retirement. It means some of us need to be willing to sacrifice our time and our talents to help teach young people how to use their gifts and talents for the kingdom. But it means that we all have work to do, every single one of us. And it won't always be easy work. It won't always be fun work, I promise you. It will be difficult at times. It might be the kind of work that makes us feel like the Israelites wandering around the desert for 40 years. Right? Just surviving on quail and manna from heaven. It's hard work. It's desert work. It'll leave you frustrated and sad when you see a young person you've invested in just walk away. It might leave you angry when you have conversations with young people and you realize you're further away from them than you thought. It might mean sacrifices of having a little bit less in your bank account or having a guest in your house because there's a young person who needs to know that God will provide for them. That's hard work. That's desert work. But what I want is for this church to be the kind of church that would gladly say, I would gladly take 40 years in the desert if it meant the next generation got to walk into the promised land. I would gladly take 40 years of hard desert work if it meant this generation got to step across the Jordan and feast on the milk and honey that God has promised them. If we're gonna do that work, if we're gonna see this next generation out of the desert and into the promised land, it's gonna require all of us. And my prayer this morning is that the Lord would bless this work, that he would give us a vision for it, that he would provide for us, that while we ourselves are in the desert, he would meet our needs so that we don't have to worry about them. And we can worry about the generation to come trusting in God. And that we would see them cross over and experience revival. And that's my prayer for us. So as I pray, I just want to invite you, let's think about this. What work do I need to do? Just ask yourself that. What work do I need to do even today in the desert to get the next generation into the promised land? Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, we pray that you would use this time to inspire us, to call us, to invite us in, God. To invite us with a vision for what you have for us and what you have for this generation, God. We pray that you would bless the work, that you would bless the work that we do, that you would move mountains in the lives of these young people, God, and that you would help us be a church that doesn't just accept things as they are, but does the work to make them better. And God, we pray these things in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.